A Short History of the Earth by Andrew K. Knoll. Where did the Earth come from and where is it going? This book is 8 chapters that pretty quickly goes through the grand sweeping history of the planet. I found that he focused mainly on life. After the first chapter, that is, what did life first look like and then how did that evolve? It's a very good general overview of life. I thought there were a lot of interesting facts in here that I didn't know before, like how we know that the carbon that's in the atmosphere is from burning fossil fuels as opposed to carbon from other sources because of the carbon isotopes. Also, how we know the geological timescales is because of uranium isotopes. And he does a good job of pointing out specific sites where they found layers of rocks that allows us to pinpoint what happened in each geological era. As a side note to that, there are 2 different stylistic approaches to telling the history of the Earth and how we know it to be true. One is you start at the beginning and you go to the end. You tell it all chronologically of what happened in what era and on through the Earth's history. And the other approach would be how we learned what happened. You'd start at the beginning guesses of how old the Earth was and how that evolved and how we went with this theory for a while, but then that didn't make sense because of this evidence, and then we found this evidence, and so that's, and so on, how we got to the Earth being the age that we know it is today. I will always prefer the second method. Tell me how we learned what we learned, as opposed to just telling me how it is. I think he did a halfway measure in this book where he talks about, he does go through it chronologically, and then he mentions what we did to learn it to some degree. He brings up a lot of interesting chain reactions that I hadn't thought about before that are kind of fun to play through in your mind. When there's extra carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, the oceans turn more acidic, and when the oceans turn more acidic, it affects the coral reefs, and when it affects the coral reefs, and so on and so on. He walks the reader through a few of these kind of scenarios for what happens when there's a lot of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. One issue I had with him talking about chain reactions in the way that he does is it's always very escalatory. And just from listening to him talk about it, you'd think there's no mediating factors whatsoever. As an example, how he talks about population increasing. The way that he talks about it, it sounds like we're on an upward trajectory of population. And if I didn't know any better, I would think that I should start some kind of public service announcement telling people to stop having kids because you're ruining the planet. When actually, I think I would be saying the opposite of that. But all in all, it was a very interesting read. I learned a lot and a good general overview of the planet that we live on. For this book, I'm going to give it 3 stars. If you have any recommendations, leave them in the comments below.